Okay, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about what we were talking about during class, but didn't quite have enough time to go through thoroughly. So, we're going to be going over level design. We're going to talk about lighting, and we're going to talk about materials, and we're going to talk about texturing techniques with materials. So this first, I'm going to break this up into 3 videos. So the first video is going to talk about game design and some of the techniques that we use with UE4 to kind of get started and work our way through final level. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. So when you open up UE4, they just added a new Learn tab. If you click on that, it's pretty much reorganized all the useful links down here in a kind of a prettier presentation. So if you take a look at it, you get the free feature samples. I recommend downloading as many of these as you can, checking them out. They're really, really cool. Content examples is the one I'm going to be using today. I really recommend downloading this one and playing around with it. This is going to be the fastest way to learn the differences between the tools in the system. So download it. I use it all the time. It's really, really useful. So yeah, I can't recommend that enough. And then once again, documentation, the video tutorials, and the wiki have all been changed. If we click on one of those, we will see that we have the same kind of documentation as before. Getting started, if you're still kind of not sure about some of the simple things in UE4, there is some great tips for everything from creating a new project to editing actors. You guys should kind of already understand most of this, but there's more stuff for artists, applying materials, importing content. This is all very well documented, and I recommend going back here if you're ever stuck, because it's 99% likely that there is a tutorial or documentation walking you through every step of the engine. So everybody references this. Best substitute for creating your own engine and having those guys in-house. Of course, UE4 is built by Epic, and although you can speak to a lot of the developers over there at the engine team, having that documentation is the next best thing to literally sitting next to them. Alright, so like I said, we're going to be using the content example project, and you can find that in the new Learn tab. So download that, and the first one I'm going to show you is the LevelDesign workflow. So if we take a look at this is one of the mobile scenes that UE4 has been showing off. If I hop on over to outside the level, you can see that there are 4 variations of what is essentially the same level. So if I increase my speed, I can take a look. First one, prototype pass, using basic meshes or BSP brushes, not pretty but playable. And then we have a mesh pass where we start importing assets, one where we start adding lighting, and one that's polished that kind of takes care of everything that was kind of standing out. So I'm going to decrease my camera so we're not going crazy. Back to 4. So if we take a look at the very first design phase, you can see that it's very, very simple. What we're looking at here is a very simply blocked out level, and they're using the brush tools. You can see that if I grab this, it's a BSP brush, which I can move around, and of course, because I did that, I broke the lighting. So let's undo I think I froze UE4 slightly. So anyway, this first level is using proxy assets, which is simply put represents like very simple geometry representing the size and the shape of the final assets that'll go in your scene. If we take a look at this, you can see that this level isn't even close to being fully fleshed out, but it has everything that will be relevant to the player's movement, meaning the stairs are in place, these pillars are in place. If we come into the next room, we can see that there's going to be something here. Maybe we don't even know what it will be, but we want it to be relatively this size. And as we play, we can see that the character moves at a certain speed. It takes this long to get here, and this is how we start developing levels in the engine, and we know right away how we're going to interact with it. So what you could do in theory is create this entire blocked out level in Maya, import it into UE4, then start playing it, but the problem with that is that you don't have a way of easily adjusting that geometry. You have to go back into Maya if you want to make changes, make the changes, export, import, and then play again. So the BSP brush tools allow us to block out these levels and do it dynamically in the engine, which saves us a lot of time. So I recommend learning these BSP brush tools. There is a separate level called geometry editing. If you open this up, it'll give you the overview of the tools used in geometry editing, and I'm gonna actually reopen this level, and I recommend going through the geometry editing. Oh, it auto-saved. Great. Anyways, I'll go ahead and play this. So we take a look at the first iteration, which is very basic level design. And then this is a really cool level. If I just hop into here, we can start seeing that there is a lot of improvement. So this stage, we start replacing those basic brush shapes with actual assets. And you can see that pretty much all the geometry is here now. It's not fully textured. Well, it has textures, but it's not the final textures. The lighting, which I broke, is not finalized. As you can see, that there's these urns or torches or whatever, and they aren't actually giving off any lights, so they'll want that. And yeah, it's just not very interesting. Everything is monotone besides a couple of colors in the floor. It's just not visually very interesting. So if we go into the next iteration, this is where lighting starts to come into play. Once again, I'm sorry that I broke that because it was much prettier at one point. But you can see that these flames are starting to give off light, which enhances the mood of the scene immensely. And they also started changing things like the color of these materials. You can see the base of this is now a different color. And this is something that we'll learn in the materials portion of our tutorials today. But the important thing to understand is that you go in with your geometry first, and then you start playing around with the materials as a whole. And we can zoom in real quick for the very last final level, which includes sound, which is pretty loud, and cool things like better reflections. And you'll have to forgive me today if the audio gets a little garbled when the engine is working hard. The other levels won't be this detailed, so we won't have to worry about it at that point. But I'm currently overclocking all of my components so that I can video record, and I can't record in full quality. It has to be in 720p, but you guys should get the general idea. So I'm gonna open a new level. So in the content example project, so there is the project. You open the project and then you're able to open all the other levels. So if I go to open level, it'll give you these levels which show off individual tools. So the first one I showed you was the level streaming, and I'll actually go into the geometry editing real quick. This video is going pretty quick. So as you guys probably already know, there's a couple different kinds of brushes. The first brush is a add brush. So basically, wherever the brush is, there'll be geometry there. The second kind of brush is a subtract brush, which means that wherever it is, it'll subtract from an add brush. Pretty simple. You can also change the shapes of these brushes. If we go into the details panel, click on that real quick, we can see that this is set to an additive. I can set it to subtractive, but I'm going to leave it as additive. And then I can change this to, I don't know, spiral stair. And you can see that if I move it over to intersect with the subtract brush, it will still subtract. So this is the tools that we use to make the basic geometry of our proxy levels, so the first iteration of our levels. So what's next? Well, we have something that's called order. So if you think about this like layers in Photoshop, you can think of it that way. So the first layer is an additive brush, and then you have a second layer which is the subtractive brush, and then you have a third layer which is an additive brush that is not affected by the subtractive brush below it. And the next thing we have are solid ability. Let's see. Oh, so you can set these to be different volumes essentially, or adding transparent material. Interesting. The next thing that's pretty important is UV scaling. So if we take a look at a brush, we can see under the surface properties there is a pan, and there's two different pans: rotate, flip, scale. And what these do is basically change whatever kind of material are the UVs of whatever the shape is. So for example, if I hit pan, you can see that it's panning the texture, and it's doing this by rearranging the UVs of this square, this cube shape. So I can pan down as well. So say you have two walls in your game, and you want them to meet up pixel perfect, right? And say instead of meeting like this, it's more something like this. And I didn't add the actual material to the side. Let's see if we can find that. No. Well, the idea is that you could have two intersecting walls and then realign the textures by changing the UVs and making them line up pixel perfect. It's a little tough to do, but that's one way to do it if you want to do kind of final quality walls. Scale, you can see that you can change the scale, and you can do other things like rotate, flip UVs, and it's a pretty useful tool if you're doing walls and stuff. The next thing we'll look at is geometry editing. So if we come up to the top tabs over here, there's a couple things we can see, and the one that we're interested in is geometry editing. So this gives you this like a similar tool set to what you've been using in Maya. You can see I'm under the edit tool. There's also a pen, and other stuff that it's not letting me use. So say you want to extrude this face. Well, you can totally do that. You hit apply, and then I've extruded it, and I can move it, and every time I move this face I'm extruding it. So I'm going to undo all that. But you could do the same thing that you would in Maya. So say I'm on extrude, I grab the scale tool, I can scale this in, and you can see it's a little finicky because I'm creating new faces and I haven't applied a material to it yet. But it's very similar to the way Maya works, where there is now faces extruded in, and you can extrude up and so on and so forth. But you can also change the shape of this object by manipulating the edges, the faces, and the vertices. And unlike Maya, you can select all of these at once, and instead of Maya, you shift select by control. So hold down control and you can grab multiple components, you move them around, and it's just as easy as that. So the next thing we can look at is like kind of a fully fleshed out house. And I've done something like this before. It doesn't take nearly as long as you might think. It's sometimes even faster than something you would do with Maya. But basically what we're looking at here is one big square that is being intersected by a couple of subtract cubes. This one is the doorway. There's one in each one of the windowsills. And then there's one inside, which is creating the inside space. So instead of creating walls on either side, you're basically just creating one big box and then, bam, adding a subtractive box. And then they're using that ordering so that they can create other add boxes within the subtract to create these windowsills. So very, very simple way of blocking out a level is using these tools. So I recommend that you play with this, kind of learn the tools, and then build something that you wouldn't expect to be able to do just as practice. Alright, so let's see. Are there any other interesting things we can talk about for level design? You know, I think that's going to be it. We're going to stop this video and then move on to lighting with another video, and then after that we're going to do materials. Alright, see you then.